3 out of 23. Do the same thing in 2009, it's 18 out of 23 countries expressed confidence in Barack Obama. The average confidence in Bush in 2008, 24% around the world. In 2009 for Obama, 64%. But the favourability of the United States has gone up much less. The favourability rating for the US in Pew in 2008, 46%. 2009, it's up, it's 57%. In the Globespan polls, Australians, for example, are only 1 percentage point more likely to view the US as being a mainly positive force in the world than China. The numbers, according to Globespan, are 37%. The US is a positive force, 36% China is a positive force. Barack Obama has improved America's global standing, but it seems he's running far more popularly than his country is. What does that tell us about the world? What does that tell us about Obama, that he's a global rock star, but people in Australia and around the world are still profoundly sceptical about the United States?
Well, I actually think he's made a quite significant difference to the attitudes towards the United States, and rather than battle out the polls, the World Public Opinion poll, which came out in April, the US was viewed positively in 20 out of 28 countries. You know, it's gradually shifting, but I think it takes time because people realise that leaders come and go, and they want to fully understand whether there's been a sort of shift in the way Americans think. So, you know, I think he has made a big difference, and but the exceptions are countries like Pakistan and Turkey, where the US perceptions are getting worse, and I think that's going to be a real challenge for him to manage attitudes in the Middle East towards America. So,
Christopher, I'm sure you have, on this issue, as opposed to all others, I'm sure you have strong views on this one, but the Obama Cairo speech is being lauded around the world, I think. It was a reaching out speech to the Muslim world. It was one in which Obama acknowledged his connections to his personal connections to Muslims. Yet you and others have been quite critical of his standoffish, less decisive policy in the Middle East. How do you weigh this Obama's standing as the world's leader versus American policy and reactions to the US?
Well, I think there's more than one way to measure opinion. For example, to take a country that I have visited a bit and know a bit about, Iran, there's no question that among the Iranian young, George Bush was very popular because they said they heard what they wanted from him. He said, if you're willing to fight for democracy, we're willing to take your side. Iran is a red state in that respect, in many, many ways. And I think the supporters of the president should be depressed that when the young Iranians were being truncheoned into puddles of blood in the street by their theocratic dictators and slave owners, they were shouting, "Obama, where are you?" because they didn't know where he stood. I think that's much more important than any finding by Pew. In his speech to the Iranian people, which was broadcast directly to them, the president said, we want to bring the Islamic Republic of Iran back into the family of nations. Sounds all right. Why is Iran not in the family of nations, though? Which he seems to agree it isn't. Because it's an Islamic Republic is why. That's what keeps it out, because it claims to own everyone in Iran. It has an ideological theory, the Vilayat-e-Faqih, that says that everyone, not including people who aren't even Muslim or Shia, is the property of the clergy, is a ward of the theocracy. And because it develops illegal nuclear weapons and has a revolutionary guard that's run a military coup against the people of the country, which is also the possessor of those weapons. These are the reasons it's not in the international community. That's a circle you can't square.
Okay, so Don, you know a thing or two about politicians' speeches. Obama's speeches to the world are all about reaching out. And Christopher said, I think it might be fair to paraphrase what he just said, is reaching out is fine, but you've got to have some principles. And the problem with Obama in the Muslim world is it's been all reach out and no principles. Do you think that, I mean, how should one craft speeches? What's the relationship between speeches and policy?
Well, I suppose that it's a little harder. I mean, Iran might be a red state, but the Middle East is something that he has much less purchase on than he has on the US. And I guess the gap between the Cairo speech and the reality of Middle Eastern politics is always going to be very much wider than any speech he makes domestically. As for I'm sceptical about speeches. I don't know. He's brilliant at them, but I don't know that they actually change much. They just sort of sit there. But I guess the problem is with the reaching out. I mean, if you take the George Bush line, but if you fight for democracy, we'll be by your side, is good, except that it maybe it echoes his father's urging of the Kurdish uprising in Iraq and then not giving them the support they needed. You can get yourself into trouble that way as well, urging people on into a battle that you may not be able to help them win, and the consequences may be terrible. So maybe Obama's motivated a little by that, I don't know.
No, with this, the Kurdish question was Kissinger giving weapons to people saying, we'll back you as long as you fight, then cutting off the weapons and not telling them. That's not the same as a principled stand in favour of Iranian democracy in the least. Anyway, you must therefore be pleased that Bush's son finally helped establish Kurdish autonomy in Iraq in a free Republican Mesopotamia.
Of course.
Though I didn't hear you say so. I'm glad to hear that. On the point of purchase, I'd like to take up on a single word, very important. You wouldn't say, would you, that the United States has no purchase on the government of Israel?
No, I wouldn't.
No. I mean, in other words, if the Israelis are going to continue to build settlements in an identifiable, just a single suburb of Jerusalem, where most of the Arab population can produce documents proving they've owned their homes since before the British Mandate. If American policy can't get them to stop building in that one identifiable suburb of Jerusalem, then there's no such thing as leverage or purchase. And Obama went to all the trouble to point out that this is a terrible thing. He should have said more than he did, in my view, that it's theft as well as an obstacle to negotiations, and then walked away from that. So that a punk government like that of Netanyahu, under the influence of a ratbag religious party, the Shas party, crackpot Orthodox party that happens to run the Ministry of Housing, is allowed to humiliate the United States, not just in the person of its vice president, who was there at the time, but its president and its Congress and its voters. And immediately the president backpedals, and now he's being attacked by some leading American Jewish organizations as being, in principle, anti-Israel. So he's had a fight with one of the Democratic Party's most important voting blocs. He's done nothing for the Palestinians, and he's made himself look like a jerk. This is not impressive.
But when was American policy in the Middle East impressive?
Well, actually, I'll give you an example. When George Bush Sr. Said to the Israelis, if you go on like this, I will ask Congress to suspend your loan guarantees, I thought that was extremely impressive. And so did everyone else in the Middle East, and it led to the nearest we've ever had to a proper peace conference. That was in Madrid. Bill Clinton chose to run that year from the right against Bush, saying that he thought Bush was being soft on Cuba, just like Kennedy. Thought Eisenhower and Nixon were being soft on communism in Cuba, and also from the right on Israel, saying if he was president, the Israelis would not be subjected to this kind of pressure. So the last time that there was an impressive American policy, it was a Republican administration, and it was undone by the hero of every liberal in this room.
Okay, so we
Not this liberal.
I'm not sure the great triangulator is a hero of
you know what
all
I mean.
liberals.
They all thought he was hard done by.
And we just you and I have just listened to an exchange on sort of principle, backbone, rhetorical flourish, etc. I wanted to see if I could just get you to reflect on an added element that seems increasingly in the mix. I'm going to quote from Richard Cohen this week in the Washington Post. I don't know, have you got a one-liner on him?
Yeah.
Maybe we can hold it for a second. Good. So I'm going to call this, I don't think this was the headline writer's tagline, but it's what I would have chosen, which is Obama the Irrelevant. And the theme here was President Obama's visit to the Gulf Coast to look at the oil spill, but apparently, according to most people, not to have done much about it. And Richard Cohen wants to say that that's a metaphor for the Obama presidency. And here's what he said. Obama is presiding over the unpresidable, the president overseeing the incomprehensible. By the way, I'm going for quotations that are supposed to have some literary flavour. Maybe journalists shouldn't be doing this kind of thing.